There's quite a few A-list directors out there who would go on to have big careers that don't specialize in horror, but they got their start with a horror movie. Steven Spielberg is a bit of a caveat because films like Jaws and Jurassic Park definitely apply horror elements. But when I think of Steven Spielberg, I often think of very majestic and spectacular films. But in 1971, he got his first chance behind the camera with a made-for-TV movie called Duel. At its core, it's a chase film between a small car and a giant 18-wheeler. But that 18-wheeler is like a monster, and this definitely flips the script on the monster movie. When I think of Tony Scott, I think of very stylized action films and thrillers. But in 1983, his directorial debut was a vampire film called The Hunger, one where David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve play rather sexy vampires. When I think of Zack Snyder, I think of big, mindless blockbusters with a lot of slow motion and bad dialogue. But his feature-length debut was a remake of Dawn of the Dead, and dare I say, this is his best film. Today, we recognize James Gunn for his work with Guardians of the Galaxy and now Superman. But in 2006, his directorial debut was a slimy creature feature called Slither. Before Francis Ford Coppola made a splash during the new Hollywood movement with The Godfather, his own debut was a low-budget horror film called Dementia 13. David Fincher got his start with horror. He was given the gig of Alien 3, an experience that was so miserable for him he almost quit on filmmaking. James Cameron would go on to have a career defined by groundbreaking blockbusters with new forms of visual effects. But in 1982, his first chance behind the camera was under producer Roger Corman doing the horror sequel Piranha 2: The Spawning. Edgar Wright has a specialty with comedy that has great timing. He applies a lot of different genres to his films, and his debut was his own take on the zombie flick Shaun of the Dead. We know it, it's a classic. Before creating game-changing fantasy films, Peter Jackson got a start with horror with not one but two films, and specifically his 1987 debut is a very entertaining, low-budget sci-fi horror film called Bad Taste. When I think of Peter Bogdanovich, I think of The Last Picture Show and Mask, and at times even various comedies. In 1968, his directorial debut was a horror thriller called Targets. It even starred a horror icon, Boris Karloff. When you think of Oliver Stone, you think of bonkers movies inspired by psychedelic experiences, some of which even delve into conspiracies. But his debut was a bonkers horror film called Seizure. Last but not least, we've got Clint Eastwood. When you think of films he's directed, horror is not the first thing that comes to mind. But his directorial debut was a psychological horror film called Play Misty for Me. I mean, look at his face on that poster.